This is Dungeon Fight Club Aftermath, and I'm Zombie Caddy. Here we're going to discuss the battle between the Githyanki Knight and the Mind Flayer, and why the battle ended the way it did. If you don't like spoilers, this will be an in-depth look at who won and why. So let's get to it. Mind Flayer versus Githyanki Knight. These two creatures are mortal enemies. I picked the Githyanki Knight and the basic Mind Flayer because they both were similar in difficulty and toughness. One, the Mind Flayer, is more of an ambush predator. It stuns, kills, and eats its prey. The Githyanki Knight is a tactician and a fighter, and though it has less stunning abilities, it has more upfront damage. Now, these two creatures fought in a battle of 40. Most of these battles will be 25 matches of 1 versus 1 combat between the two creatures. In this case, I did 40. This was in the early stages of coming up with the idea, and so I was not sure of how many to do to get good statistics. 25 turns out to be okay. 40 is a bit overkill, but it definitely narrowed it down to how dominant one would be over the other. And in this case, the Githyanki Knight won 29 and lost 11. So why was this? The Githyanki Knight overwhelmingly won, and in the end it becomes the way these two creatures battle. The Mind Flayer is based off of ambush attacks, but these ambush attacks are meant to stun. The Githyanki Knight had a very high save rate. The Githyanki Knight is smart and had a +5 on intelligence saves. This helped it save out of the many stuns that it did incur. I think the key element of this battle was that the Githyanki Knight could get in, attack, and get out with Misty Step. And then if it needed to do anything else, like jump up to where the Mind Flayer was, it would use the spell Jump, which triples your jump height. The Mind Flayer could only fly about 20 feet above the air in a single turn. That is covered by the Githyanki Knight's jump height. So in any time, it could get up there, grapple, attack, stab, and the main ability that is used by a Mind Flayer has a recharge, the Mind Blast. And if it misses, nothing happens. You've wasted your turn. In this fight as well, we tried every single style of combat. From the Mind Flayer being ambush predator to them standing in front of each other and hacking and slashing. And in all cases, the Githyanki Knight was victorious. Now, the stats will show that there were a bunch of different battles across different maps as well. There were different size maps, and there was one hazard map. I added the hazard map because I wanted there to be a wild card, the ability for the creatures to use their environment more than just moving out of the way and getting space between the two. In the 29 to 11 win rate of the Githyanki to the Mind Flayer, big maps, it won 7-3. Small maps, it won 8-2. Medium-sized maps, it won 8-2. And hazard maps, it won 6-4. The hazard map was a more even battlefield in this case, and the reason is because the Mind Flayer, instead of trying to go for a feed or trying to kill it outright, could just push it into the lava. This map was a small cylinder with a lava field around it, so at any point either one could simply just throw the other one into the lava. Even with that, the Githyanki still won 6-4. The map sizes are as follows. A small map was a 20 by 20 map. The hazard map was a 25 by 35. The medium map was a 30 by 30, and the large map was a 35 by 51 map, and that's a 5-foot grid map. So let's start from the top. Why did I pick these two? I picked these two because they were mortal enemies. For the Mind Flayer, I picked its basic stat block. The Githyanki Knight was picked because it is a similar difficulty to the regular Mind Flayer. We wanted a match that would be both balanced and fair to both species. Realistically, these Githyanki would be going out on missions where they would be more likely to meet Mind Flayers. So both from a practical standpoint and a story standpoint, this makes sense. Now many may say, well, why don't pick a Githyanki warrior? Well, they're not very evenly matched at all. The Githyanki warrior has half the hit points, and though it has a very good save and many of the same spells as the Githyanki Knight, it is like saying who would win in a fight, a knight versus a civilian. Well, the knight's going to be more likely to win. Now, the Mind Flayers are also, they have civilians, but all their civilians are higher level. All of their regular people are Mind Flayers. So they have all the abilities and all the spells and all of the damage that a Mind Flayer has. Whereas the Githyanki aren't like that. They're a normal species of people. And we go into this when we're talking about how the Mind Flayer is born and created. They're a parasitic species. they attach to other species and then form into fully powerful Mind Flayers. Githyanki are, at their base, a civilization that relies on breeding for increased population. They are always going to have some level of disadvantage. In many ways, I think this was probably the fairest assessment between these two species. There's enough Githyanki Knights that would complement a real battle against the Mind Flayers, and there's not so many Mind Flayers anymore, so that would complement them all being highly trained in combat. For example, one of the main things I think that really came into play was the hit rate. The hit rate is, for the Githyanki Knight, a 77% hit rate. The Mind Flayer was 43%. So you see the difference in how much the Mind Flayer was missing. When confronted with a foe like the Githyanki Knight with plate armor, after playtesting, it turns out that a foe like the Githyanki Knight is very difficult for a Mind Flayer, because even if it gets its Mind Blast off, Githyanki Knight can save out of it and then Misty Step away, always keeping its distance and striking with precision. I also took into calculations how many times the Githyanki Knight saved. It saved 59% of the time out of stuns. Now, this is interesting because the Mind Flayer passed its saves 5 out of 6 times. So there wasn't as many battles where the Mind Flayer really had to save out of something. In some of the battles, I started using telekinesis and other things to try and vary combat in order to see different techniques. As a matter of fact, the only time a Mind Flayer failed was when it was thrown into the lava, which ended up being the final combat used in the story for the game. Now, how I picked these stories to use for the final combat sequence was after doing the 40 battles between these two. Each time I would do a battle, I would write down what happened and a general outline of the moves that were made during that fight. So everything was recorded. That was the most exciting one. That one brought them both to their heels. In the end, the Mind Flayer had, I believe, 17 hit points left, and the Githyanki Knight only had about 7. Its last play was to use that telekinesis to throw the Mind Flayer into the lava, and it worked. Other thing that I also took into play was how many rounds it took to defeat an enemy. The Githyanki took about 3.3 rounds to defeat a Mind Flayer. The Mind Flayer would take about 3.5 rounds to defeat a Githyanki Knight. Now that's important because 3 rounds is how many rounds the Githyanki Knight has a Misty Step. Once the Githyanki Knight was out of its Misty Step, often that's when it couldn't escape anymore. Keeping the two separated allowed for the most tactical combat possible. Tactically, it made the most sense, and I won the most with the Mind Flayer when I could really hide, sneak attack the Githyanki, and then get good damage enough to kill it and stun it right away. Now, even though the win rate was high for the Githyanki Knight, there were many battles where they were close to death or just barely defeating the Mind Flayer. Only about a quarter of these matches ended in a complete flawless domination. Taking everything into account, the 72% win rate for the Githyanki Knight is based on the fact that it could get in and out, do quick damage, and was really hard to stun, while the Mind Flayer was heavily reliant on stunning and ambush attacks. I can see why it would look like the Mind Flayer has too many overwhelming abilities. Its Mind Blast initially stuns, its tentacle attacks stun, and then its brain extraction is based off of being stunned. Now, I can see how this would create a death spiral. Once you're stunned, you're incapacitated. And when you're incapacitated, you can't take actions or reactions. And when you can't take actions or reactions, it means that you can't get out of your grapple, and so the Mind Flayer can just feast on you. It would seem as if this is just an instant kill and should have happened a lot more. But again, that save rate on the Githyanki Knight, a 59% save rate. First off, it was saving against the initial Mind Blasts. Mind Blasts were the things that typically happen first. You would kind of be crazy not to play a Mind Flayer and not Mind Blast first. The only way that would happen is if the enemy to the Mind Flayer is so close that it's forced to use a tentacle attack and get away. So if you think of it this way, this is the dilemma for the Mind Flayer. If it attacks with its regular tentacles, it's got a 43% chance of hitting. If it attacks with its Mind Blast, it's got a 41% chance of hitting. That's a 2% difference. If it hits with its tentacles, there's a Githyanki with a giant greatsword sitting right in front of it, possibly able to save out of it, and ready to strike. If it hits with its Mind Blast, it can get distance and then go in when it knows it's safe. So in the end, the Githyanki Knight won. We will see next time when the Pit Fiend fights a Baylor. Thank you to Nathan Tavares, Jay Polk, Jason Masood for all their help during this episode. So like, comment, and subscribe if you liked it, and I'll see you next time. Be good to each other. Bye.
Thank you for watching. 3, 2, 1, subscribe!